Yeah, and we were allowed to visit back and forth in each other's homes, and we became good friends once again. This thing really does work.
See, I used to want to get even with people. Anybody here want to get even with people? Well, let me tell you how to get even with people, is you pray for them. And when you pray for them, then you're even. You see? And then you're even. And that's the way that works.
I think the reason it works so good is prayer for the welfare and benefit of another human being is probably one of the greatest expressions of love that one human being can have for another. And love and hate can't exist on the same plane. One will have to take the place of the other. And as we pray for these people, slowly, slowly, the resentment disappears, and it's replaced with something entirely different. It really does work. Now just think. If I can get rid of 95% of my resentments because they look so dumb, if I can get rid of the other 5% through prayer, then that means I can be resentment-free. The damaged and unsaleable goods called resentments have now been emptied out of these display cases over here in my little store. And now that the display cases are emptied out, they can now be refilled with good items. And the only thing that will refill them will be the opposite of the resentment. God's not going to leave another hole in my head. I've got enough of those already. As the resentments disappear, they're automatically replaced with the opposite. Where my mind used to be filled with resentment, now it's filled with love, patience, tolerance, compassion, goodwill toward my fellow man, understanding. Those are God's thoughts. My thoughts were the resentments. And now that those display cases are filled with God's thinking, then I'm beginning to experience a little peace of mind, a little serenity, a little happiness. I'm in much less chance of drinking now than I was before I started this inventory process. A third of my store has now been straightened up. Nothing negative about any of these action steps. Every action step has a positive result to it every time. Resentments have been removed, and they're replaced with love, patience, tolerance, compassion, goodwill, and understanding. But it would do me no good to get rid of resentments if I didn't know how to keep them from coming back. Because the world's full of sick people, and they're going to do it to me again tomorrow. And if I'm not careful, I'll let myself resent. And I don't seem to be able to have one resentment. If I get one, the next thing you know, I've got two. And then that doubles up to 4. And then I've got 8, and I've got 16, and I've got 32, and then I'm a basket case all over again. I've got to do one more thing before I can leave these resentments. Let's go to page 67. Let's unfold the last 2 columns now on your inventory sheet. He says, referring to our list again. See, you got to have a written inventory. It's the second time we've had to go back to it. Referring to our list again. Putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. Uh-oh. We've never done this. We've always looked to see what they did. We've never looked to see our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly, and we're willing to set these matters straight. Now then we go to the 4th column. And you'll notice up at the top of the fourth column, using basically the words right out of the big book, putting out of my mind the wrong others have done to me, I resolutely look for my own mistakes. What did I do, if anything, to set in motion trains of circumstances which in turn caused people or institutions to hurt me and eventually led to my resentment of them for doing so? So I go back to that first name on my sheet, this lady named Barbara. I said, now, Charlie, do what the book says. Forget what Barbara did to you. Forget about those 3 divorces. Forget about the part of self that was hurt by this. Go into column 4 and write down what did you do, if anything, to set this in motion. It took me about 5 seconds. And I said, if I hadn't been out there screwing around, I wouldn't have got caught. And if she hadn't have caught me, she probably wouldn't have filed for divorce. Now, Joe calls that committing adultery. I just call it screwing around. Another 5 seconds. If I hadn't been sneaking around behind her back and lying to her all the time, she probably wouldn't have filed for divorce in the first place. Another 5 seconds. If I hadn't been blowing all of our money on what I thought was important, paying no attention to what my wife and children needed, she probably wouldn't have filed for divorce in the first place. And for the first time, I began to see decisions that I had made to satisfy self, based on my basic instincts of life. And those decisions that I made created a problem for her. All she did was retaliate against me for doing the things that I had been doing. Took me a long time to find out she didn't really want a divorce anyhow. She was just trying to stop my drinking. And she was trying to keep me home with the kids. And she was trying to force me into being a decent husband and decent father. But you see, my self-will wouldn't let that happen. And I almost destroyed our relationship based on the things that I did. And I suddenly realized why I loved resentment so well. Because you see, every time I played that over in my head, I made what she did a little bit worse, and made what I did a little bit less, and let me play it over in my head long enough, and I'll distort the picture to the point where it's all her damn fault to start with, and I didn't have anything to do with it. That's why we love our resentments. It's a way that we can justify doing anything in the world that we want to do. And we can't stand to look at those things we're doing when we're out there doing our thing. So we have to transfer blame to others. And I very effectively transferred all blame to her. And it was all her damn fault. Now we men go from woman to woman to woman to woman. You ladies go from man to man to man to man. We go from job to job to job to job. We go from city to city to city to city and state to state to state to state, and it's always their damn fault. And we'll never see that unless we honestly look at these resentments. Internal Revenue Service. I said, now forget them trying to put you in jail. What did you do to set this thing in motion? Well, hell, I was cheating on my income tax. And I got caught. And rather than admit that I'm a liar and a thief and a cheat, I resented them for trying to put me in jail. And played it over and over and over. And distorted the picture and made them to blame and made myself as pure as the driven snow. You've got to develop these kind of skills if you're a practicing alcoholic. I don't think we could live with ourselves if we had to honestly see what's going on when we're out there doing our thing. But you see, we don't ever have to see that, because we got this little convenient thing called resentments, where we gradually transfer all blame from ourselves to others, make ourselves as pure as the driven snow, and go ahead and live life the way we want to live it. Joe was the same way with Rose. Joe hadn't been out there fooling around, Rose probably wouldn't have had an affair with another man. If Joe had been staying home with his wife, like a husband should, she probably wouldn't have had that affair with another man. If Joe hadn't been blowing all his money on booze and other things, she probably wouldn't have had an affair with another man. Did you hear that? Spending money he didn't have, trying to impress people he didn't like. Does that sound familiar to anybody? So for the first time, I began to see the part that I played in it. Then I looked into the fifth column, and using the same character defects that come out of the big book, we look in the fifth column, and it says, where had I been? Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, and inconsiderate, which we're going to see in another page or two. Which of the above character defects caused me to do what I did, or caused me to hold on to the old resentment, even though I may have done nothing to cause it? In this little deal with Barbara, was I selfish? You better bet I was. I wanted what I wanted whenever I wanted it, and to hell with Barbara and everybody else. Plain old selfishness. Was I dishonest? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Sneaking around behind her back, lying to her all the time. Was I self-seeking and frightened? Yeah. Yeah, I was getting close to 40 years old. And I said to myself, man, if you're ever going to get any of that, you better get out there and get it before you're too old. Fear causes us to do a lot of things that we normally would not do. Was I inconsiderate? You betcha. If I considered what my wife and my children needed ahead of what I thought I needed, I wouldn't have been out there doing those kind of things in the first place. And for the first time, in that fifth column, I begin to see the type personality that I had developed through my years of living a life run on self-will. And I didn't like what I saw. I thought I was a pretty good guy. But when I looked into that fifth column out there, I began to see just how lousy I really was. With the Internal Revenue Service, was I selfish? Sure. I wanted that money. I needed that money to do the things I wanted to do. Was I dishonest? You better bet I was. I was cheating them every way that I possibly could. Joe with Rose. Was he selfish? Well, you heard him a while ago. Hell, he left home and very seldom returned. Sometimes it'd be 2-3 months before he came back. Not really considering her, but considering what he wanted and needed to do. Was he dishonest? Oh, yeah. Was he inconsiderate? Oh, yeah. These are the 4 basic character defects talked about in the big book. All other character defects stem from these 4 right here. And when I saw that fifth column, I began to see those things within me that I'm going to have to change if I want to live free in the future. If I stay selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, and inconsiderate, I'm going to keep right on doing the same old things. I'm going to keep right on hurting people and institutions, and they're going to retaliate And I'm going to resent. And eventually I'm going to get drunk over it. Now, I don't have to become perfect. Just think, if I could become a little less selfish, if I could become a little less dishonest, if I could become a little less self-seeking, frightened all the time, if I could become a little less inconsiderate of other people, then maybe I wouldn't be doing so many of those things that hurt other people. And then they're not going to retaliate. And then I'm not going to have to resent. At the very least, I'm going to have to work on some of this stuff. Because if I don't change me with God's help, then I'm going to keep right on doing the same things over and over and over and over. See, my personality was to be selfish. Dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, and inconsiderate. Now, the big book tells me that I'm going to have a spiritual awakening. A personality change sufficient to recover from alcoholism. I can't keep that old personality and change at the same time. So I see what I'm going to have to start trying to get rid of. Now, we're doing step 4 at the present time. This is the resentment part, and Joe's going to put a 4 right up at the top of the sheet. Out in the 5th column, I now see the exact nature of the wrong that I'm going to talk about to another human being. The resentment is the wrong. That's what blocks me from the sunlight of the Spirit. But what's the exact nature of that resentment? What's the inherent characteristic of that resentment? What's within me that causes that resentment to start with? This is what I'm going to talk about in step 5. Guy comes to me to do a step 5. I don't care whether he's stolen once or 100 times. What I want to know is what's within him that caused him to do that. Did he do it from selfishness? Did he do it from dishonesty? Did he do it from fear? I don't care how many times he's committed adultery. I want to know what's within him that causes him to do those things. That's what we're going to have to work on. The exact nature of the wrong. In the 5th column, I now see the character defects that I'm going to be willing to turn loose of in step 6. Knowing that if I stay selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, and inconsiderate, I don't stand a chance. In the 5th column, I now see the shortcomings I'm going to ask God to take away in step 7. And hopefully they will become less and less and less. And hopefully they'll be replaced with something different. Now, in my case, in column 1, my entire list of names, I didn't have a name on there that I hadn't done something to them that created a problem for them. Some way I had harmed them, and they retaliated against me. So in my case, all the names in column 1, in your case, some of the names in column 1 probably, will now come off of this sheet and be added to a sheet to be used later on for steps 8 and 9. You see how simple this is? If I've done the resentment inventory the way the big book says, then I've set myself up with all the information I need for steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, resentment-wise. Very, very simple process. My God, I've learned 1,000 things by doing this. I'm beginning to get rid of some of those resentments. I'm beginning to see the things that I need to work on to change. Now, I hear some of you saying, and believe me, I do hear real good. I hear some of you saying, well, Charlie, that's probably true. For those people that we did something to harm them. But how about those people that hurt us? That we didn't do anything to set it in motion? How about those people that hurt us as kids when we were growing up? How about the sexual abuse? How about the mental abuse? How about the physical abuse? How about the abuse that we suffer in some of our marriages? Aren't we justified in having that kind of resentment? Well, I guess we are, if we want to get drunk over it. A justified resentment does the same thing to you that an unjustified resentment does. It blocks you off from the sunlight of the Spirit. Whoever you're resenting justified, they are controlling your thinking for you. They're controlling your actions. They're controlling your life for you. And if we've got one of those kind of resentments, for God's sake, let's put it on this sheet of paper. Let's put down who they are. What did they do? Which part of self is affected? What did I do to set it in motion? Nothing in column 4. But let's look in to the 5th column. Maybe the reason that I don't want to get rid of that resentment is maybe I'm using it to rationalize and justify doing things I really shouldn't be doing. Or maybe I'm using it to rationalize and justify not doing things that I should be doing. This lady in the story that Joe read, she resented her mother. My God, she loved that resentment. She used it to justify her lack of education. Bull. She could have got that education if she wanted to. But it's so much easier to say, well, I could have gotten an education if Mother hadn't have done that to me, and it's all her fault. She used it to justify her marital failure. Bull. Mama didn't have anything to do with that marital failure. But it's a lot easier to blame it on Mama than take responsibility for it herself. She even used it to justify her alcoholism. Bull. I'll tell you why she became alcoholic. She kept on drinking that whiskey, that's why. Mama didn't pour that whiskey down her. But it's so much easier to blame it on somebody else. Rationalization and justification. I think the catchword for it today is victimization. And we don't have room in AA for victimization.
No.
Because when you're dealing with victimization, you're still blaming everything on everybody else. And you've taken no responsibility for your own behavior and the way you think and the way you feel. And therefore you don't have to change. And if we alcoholics don't change, we're going to drink as sure as anything. So if you got one of those, for God's sake, get it on here and look at it. Look in the 5th column. Am I using it for some selfish reason? Is fear causing me to use it? Fear of having to take responsibility for my own life and my own behavior? Or is it easier to blame it on them? Am I so dishonest with me that I refuse to see the truth of it? If you got a resentment today, it's not true. I'm going to say that again. If you got a resentment today, it's not true. Oh, it started with truth. No doubt about that. But if you've played it over and over and over and over in your head, you've distorted the picture and you're not seeing the full truth behind it. Are we so dishonest we refuse to look at the truth? Are we so inconsiderate of another human being that we fail to realize that people that do those things to us, they're not necessarily bad people. They're sick people. They probably would have done it to anybody under those conditions. If we can even begin to think about that, maybe we can start a forgiving process. Maybe we can start to develop a relationship with another human being before it's too late. At the very, very least, we're going to have to do something about this. It really doesn't make any sense to let somebody hurt me 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago and let them hurt me every day for the rest of my life. As long as I'm resenting them, they've got me. And they hurt me. And they keep me from peace of mind and happiness. And eventually, they're going to kill me because they're going to cause me to get drunk over it. And I know with you ladies, this sexual abuse is a terrible thing. I know it is. But believe me, it's not just you, it's we men too. God, I don't know how many fifth steps I've taken with other people, and every one of them has the same kind of stuff. We were sexually abused too. By father, by an older brother, by the next door neighbor, somebody in nearly all of our lives too. It's a terrible thing. But we can get rid of that crap. And we don't have to let them hurt us every day for the rest of our life if we don't want to. This is the way to get rid of this kind of stuff. And the final thing you can do for those people is, by God, pray for them. The hardest thing in the world to do is pray for somebody that has hurt you so badly. But if we pray for them, that doesn't mean that we approve of them. That doesn't mean we approve of what they did. That doesn't mean we're going to be friends for the rest of our life. What that means is, I'm tired of letting other people make me sick. I don't have to do that any longer because I have a way to look at that stuff honestly, truthfully, and to get rid of it. Now, the next part of our inventory thing is going to be fear and sex. And Joe leaned over here a while ago and he said, Charlie, I've got a hell of a headache. He said, I don't really feel like sex tonight. He said, let's go get a good night's sleep and we'll have sex tomorrow morning. Is that okay with you guys?
Right on.
Thank you all for being here today.
That's good, Charlie. Real good. Thank you. My name is Joe, and I'm an alcoholic. And it's truly by God's grace and the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, a program of Alcoholics Anonymous that I found in a book called Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm sober today, and for that I'm very, very thankful. And I've been sober ever since I quit drinking. And I'd like to read the preamble, please. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem to help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We're self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy. Neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and to help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. I have been racking my brain all morning for a little story that I could tell from up here. I know thousands of those other ones, but that's the way my mind is. But I finally come up with one, an old friend of mine, his name was Buttermilk Smith, sober in Alcoholics Anonymous a long time. And he used to tell the story about the midget logger. Have you ever heard the story of the midget logger? Well, this guy was a little midget, and he wanted to go up to the North Country and cut wood. And he was a logger and a good one. So he went up to the logging boss, and he said, where's the logging boss? He said, that big Swede over there, about 6'4", weighed about 250. So he went over and joked on his britches leg. He looked down at him and said, what do you want, little fella? He said, I come up here to get a job as a logger. He said, we don't hire midgets. He said, I didn't come up here to get a job as a midget. I come up here to get a job as a logger, and I'm a good one. And the guy said, well, I'll see how he works. So he throwed him this 6-pound chopping axe, and he said, jump on that bull pine over there and see how you can do. And boy, the chips started flying. In just a few minutes, the little logger said, timber. That's the way they talk. Tree went down. That logger looked at him. He said, little fella, that is the best cutting job on a tree as I have ever seen in my life. And I've been up here in the woods for 40 years. He said, where in the world did you learn how to cut wood like that? And he said, well, when I was a little fella, my daddy took me out in that Mojave forest, and we cut wood from sun up to sundown, day in, day out. And when you do anything that long, you get good at it. He said, wait a minute, little fella. So I thought the Mojave was a desert. He said, well, it is now.
It is now.
I'm getting close to the bottom.
Are you through?
I'm through.
Morning, everybody. My name is Charlie P. I'm a very grateful recovering alcoholic.
Hey, Charlie.
Because I'm a member of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and by the grace of the power that I found through the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink for 13,016 days, one day at a time, and for this I'm very grateful. You all really, really, really look good this morning. Not a resentment left in the whole bunch. Isn't that something? Huh? How many of you went back where you were staying last night and worked on at least one resentment? Could I see your hands? Yeah, a bunch of you. How many of you got rid of at least one resentment? Can I see your hands? Yeah. How many of you did we give a new resentment to last night? Can I see your hands?
Pray for us. We need the prayers and you need the practice.
They tell me that in AA you shall know the truth. Makes you madder than hell once in a while, too, when you hear it, but that's okay. I'm going to tell a little joke.
He loves the way he tells this.
I love to tell them, and been letting Joe tell most of them. My story is about a little Catholic boy, and it was his birthday, and he wanted a bicycle for his birthday. And he went to his dad, and he said, Dad, is there any possibility of me getting a birthday present, a bicycle for my birthday? And his father said, well, son, I'm sorry. He said, I can't afford to get you a bicycle. He said, you got 2 or 3 or 4 brothers and sisters, and I can just barely make a living, buy the food and stuff. We can't afford a bicycle. The little boy said, well, what could I do about getting one? And his father said, well, why don't you write a letter to God? You never know. Try it and see what happens. So the little boy goes back to his room, and he sits down at a desk and got a pencil and a piece of paper, and he began to write, and he said, Dear Jesus, he said, I'm a little Catholic boy. I'm 13 years old. I never had a bicycle. He said, oh, hell, that wouldn't work. And he tore the paper up and threw it away. And he sat there and thought for a little while, and he got another piece of paper, and he began to write, and he said, Dear God, he said, I'm a little Catholic boy, and I'm 13 years old, and I've always been good in church, and I've never had a bicycle. He said, crap, that won't work. And he tore it up and threw it away. And while sitting there, he happened to look up on a dresser, and he saw a little statuette of the Virgin. And all of a sudden, his eyes lit up, and he jumped up, and he grabbed that statuette, opened up his underwear drawer, reached in and got a pair of socks, unrolled the socks, put the statuette in the socks, rolled them up, put them way back in the back of the underwear drawer, and very carefully covered them up and shut the drawer. Sat down at a desk and got a pencil and a piece of paper, and he said, Dear Jesus, if you ever want to see your mama again, I'll bet he turned out to be one of us too. What do you think? Last night we spent a lot of time on the resentment part of the inventory process. And we went into the big book and we found the instructions on how to fill out the inventory sheet. And we had our sample inventory sheet, and we filled out those first 3 columns. And in the first column, we made a list of those people, institutions, principles we were angry with, going from top to bottom. Second column, we put down the cause of the anger, going from top to bottom. Third column, we put down the part of self that was affected, going from top to bottom. And as we filled that out, we learned valuable information. In the first column, we learned how angry, how resentful we really are, how many we have, and how much that blocks us off from God. In the second column, we begin to see that it's not really them we're angry at or resentful toward. It's what they've done to us. More so than who they are, it's what they've done. In the third column, we begin to realize it's not even what they've done to us. It's how we choose to react to a threat to one of our basic instincts of life, which determines whether we're going to be angry or not. So in filling out the 3 columns, we learn a lot of good things. We also found out that resentments are an absolute, complete waste of time, because whenever we got resentments churning around in our head, we're pretty well blocked and paralyzed from doing anything worthwhile. And we decided we didn't want to spend any more time, didn't want to waste any more time in harboring resentments toward other people because they do us no good whatsoever. We found out the worst thing about resentments is they block us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. And blocked off from God, we don't feel good. And if we don't feel good, eventually we go back to drinking. So the main thing wrong with the resentment is eventually, they cause us to end up getting drunk all over again. Big Book says they are the number one offender. We also, as we went back to that list and looked at it, we began to realize that other people have controlled and dominated our thinking as far back as we can remember through our resentments toward them. We always thought we had control, but we never did. And as they controlled and dominated our thinking as far back as we can remember through our resentments toward them, then they very effectively controlled and dominated our lives for us. And that began to look so stupid. The resentments look great in your head, but you get them down on paper and see the truth behind them. They look so stupid that about 95% of them begin to disappear automatically. We alcoholics don't like to look stupid. We also found that the other 4 or 5% that didn't disappear automatically, that we could use prayer. And through prayer for those individuals, asking God to give them in their lives what we want for ourselves, that those resentments could disappear also. In other words, we could be resentment-free by following the instructions in the Big Book. But we also found out it would do no good to get rid of the resentments if we didn't know how to keep them coming back, because the world's full of sick people, and they're going to do it to us again tomorrow. So we had to go back to that list again. And in the 4th column, we began to look and see the part we played in that resentment. What did we do to set that thing in motion? And we found it almost invariably, based on self, we made decisions which hurt other people or institutions. They in turn retaliated against us and created pain for us. We in turn resented them for doing so. And by playing the resentment over and over and over in our head, we gradually distorted the picture and transferred all blame to them and made ourselves as pure as the driven snow. The 4th column is extremely important, because it lets me see what I have actually done to create that resentment in the first place. And in my case, every resentment that I had was against somebody that I had hurt in some way. You know, I never did have a policeman put me in jail for sober driving. I never had a woman drag me through a divorce court because I was a good husband and a good father. I never had anybody beat the hell out of me for keeping my mouth shut. Nearly always I made a decision based on self. And that created the problem, and then I resented and transferred all blame to them. You've got to be able to do that if you're a practicing alcoholic. I don't think we could live with ourselves if we didn't have the ability to do that. In the 5th column, we looked to see what was within us that really caused that. And we began to see that old selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, inconsiderate character that we had become. And we began to see that if we didn't change that personality in that 5th column, we'd keep right on doing the same old things over and over and over, keep right on hurting people. They in turn would retaliate, and we in turn would resent, and then eventually get drunk. We begin to see where we'd become very selfish human beings, very dishonest, very self-seeking, frightened, very inconsiderate. But if we could change those things, then maybe we wouldn't do some of the things we used to do. Maybe we wouldn't hurt people in institutions, and maybe they wouldn't retaliate, and then we wouldn't have to resent them for doing so. And we ended up by saying in that we were doing step 4, the inventory part of it. In the 5th column, we saw the exact nature of the wrongs we'd talk about to another human being. In the 5th column, we saw the character defects we'd be willing to get rid of in step 6. In the 5th column, we saw the shortcomings we'd ask God to take away in 7. And quite naturally, the majority of the names in column 1 were people and institutions we had harmed, so they come off of that list and they'll be added to the list to be used later on for steps 8 and 9. We had all the information we needed now for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 resentment-wise. Now, we don't want to give you, though, the impression that you can always be 100% resentment-free. You know, resentments are not necessarily a bad thing if they're used for a worthwhile purpose. You know, if somebody says something or does something to me that threatens my self-esteem, if it causes me to look at myself and causes me to see some changes I need to make, and I go ahead and make the changes, then that resentment can be used for a worthwhile purpose. God never gave us anything bad. It just depends on what we do with stuff. Let me give you for an instance. Let's say we're living in the neighborhood. All the old houses are run down. They all need painting. Torn window screens, broken window panes. Mine's no worse than anybody else's house. I go home in the evening, I sit on the front porch, and I rock, and I'm very complacent about that situation. But one day I look up, and some idiot has moved in across the street. He's out there painting his house. He's fixing his window screens and window panes. Makes my house look bad. I resent the hell out of him. I say, who in the hell is he moving in here screwing up the whole neighborhood? Now, if I use that resentment right, though, it'll cause me to become a little bit ashamed of my house. And I paint my house and fix the window screens and window panes. My next door neighbor resents me for doing so, and the next thing you know, he's painted his house. And after a while, God's got the whole neighborhood cleaned up like it should have been in the first place. That's the proper use of a resentment. Now, we alcoholics won't use it that way. We'll sit there on our front porch and we'll rock and we'll rock and we'll resent and we'll resent. And 30 days later at midnight, we'll go over and burn his damn house down. We'll show him. So resentments are not all bad. It just depends on what we do with them as to whether they're going to be something bad that hurts us or whether it can be used for a worthwhile purpose. Okay, this morning now we're going to go to the second manifestation of self. And the big book refers to that as fear. Joe?
Yeah, we're going to talk about fears this morning, and again, we're not going to psychoanalyze ourselves in this way. We're not going to say the reason we have all these fears is because Mommy set us on the potty chair backwards or something like that. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do is do exactly what the book says. We're going to find the facts, we're going to face the facts, and then we're going to engage in a process to accept the facts. Remember when he said that when the spiritual malady is overcome, malady means illness. When the spiritual illness is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. And my illness is not only with God, it was within myself, my own internal moral fiber. And remember, Dr. Jung told Roland, ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which the guiding force of the lives of these people are suddenly cast to one side. And on page 18, if you will, for just a moment, that first paragraph tells my whole story. He said, an illness of this sort, we've come to believe it an illness, involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness. For with it goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends, and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents, and anyone can increase the list. In other words, alcoholism is a family illness. And if you live with one of us as a practicing alcoholic very long, you're going to be affected by it, adversely, mostly. My dad, I know today, I didn't know then, but I know my dad was an alcoholic. And he had an obsession to drink. And my mother had an obsession to see that he didn't drink. And I grew up in that. We went out to California. We didn't fit in real good there. We came back to West Tulsa, and my dad got a job as an iceman. He had a wife and 5 kids, making less than minimum wages, working 6 days a week, hard days, carrying ice to people's houses back in those days. Saturday, he'd get off work and go by the bootlegger and pick up a pint of whiskey. He needed to drink. I think today he deserved a drink after working that hard. But my mother saw that $2 going for alcohol, which could have gone for food for her kids. And it set up a very fearful attitude in our family. And they fought and they fussed and they raised hell, and I grew up in that. And I got to be about 7 years old, and my dad's drinking progressed. Eventually, he began to pull out a gun and threaten my mother with it, and this kid scared the heck out of me. And sometimes he would leave on Friday, and my mother and he would be gone all weekend. And before he left, he would tell us that he was going to kill our mother this weekend. And I'm sitting there at home wondering if he's going to do that. And I used to bite my fingernails all the way down to the quick, worried about whether or not he was going to do that. Always relieved when I found out that he didn't. But my mother, I guess, got tired of that, and she had him arrested and put in Eastern State Hospital in Bonita, our local nut house. And they didn't have any alcoholic treatment wards in Oklahoma at that time. But what they did have was a criminally insane ward. And they committed my dad there for a period of time until he got well. Could have been a while. My dad was there for 3 years and 7 months and 13 days. And he was an alcoholic. That's what they did with us in those days. Now, I used to hitchhike up there with my brother and I to take him a couple of dollars and a carton of cigarettes from time to time. And we'd go back into Building 6 up on the 3rd floor, and we would visit with my dad. And I saw things in there that nobody's supposed to see. And as I would leave there and walk that 3 miles down to the old 66 highway to hitchhike home, I began to get a bunch of ideas, emotions, and attitudes which would become the guiding force of my life. And one of them was, and all these came to me without any help from anybody else. I'm good at this. And the thought came to me was this: if God, I'm going to blame it on somebody, right? If God is going to do this to me and to us, then to hell with him. If I ever get big enough they can't catch me, I'm not going anymore. And I'll not be talking to him anymore either. And I didn't for a long, long time. And another thought came to me one day was, boy, it hurts real bad to love people. I mean, this hurts. I am not going to love anybody anymore. And I began to push people out of my life. Another thought came to me was, if anything good is going to happen in my life, it's going to happen because I, all alone, without any help, made it that way. And I didn't need God, nothing, or nobody. Now, I thought those were very brave ideas on my part for many, many a year. I thought they were. Turns out, through inventory, the most fearful thoughts you could possibly have. These are not very good coping skills, by the way. They put you in jail for those kind of things, which they did for me. Put me in prison for those things, which they did for me. They divorced me for those kind of ideas, emotions, and attitudes that I had. And I did not know that I was fearful. I did not know that. Let's go now to page 67. He said, notice that the word fear, that's the last paragraph. Notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Miss Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it, my own moral fiber. It was set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. When I'd be sitting in that prison looking around at all them other guys smoking cigarettes and the lights out, I could see what they were thinking because I was thinking the same thing. I said, I'm not like this. This is not like me. What am I doing here? It's just not me. But you do the crime, you do the time. That's the way that goes too. But did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think that fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. We reviewed our fears thoroughly and put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We asked ourselves why we had them. Here it was for me. Wasn't it because that self-reliance failed? I didn't need God, nothing, or nobody. Totally self-reliant. And ultimately, that failed and damn near killed me. Trying to live up to those brave ideas I thought were so brave, which turns out to be more fearful.
Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. Now, in that first paragraph on page 68, we see basically the same set of instructions to look at our fears as we had for resentments, just worded a little bit differently, which is Bill's normal way of doing things. So to avoid any confusion, we made up another little inventory sheet. We call it a review of fears. Looks almost exactly like the resentment sheet, except it's going to be on fears rather than resentments. Column 1, who or what do I fear? Column 2, the cause of the fear. Column 3, which part of self is affected? Column 4, what did I do to set this thing rolling? Column 5, where had I been? Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, or inconsiderate. So we will go back to column 1, and we start making a list of our fears, always going from top to bottom. Now, we men tend to say, well, we don't have much fear, we're tough, we're macho. But we're not talking about physical fear as much as we are the fears that run through our minds, that really, really do control and rule and dominate the way we think, which in turn controls and rules and dominates the way we act, which in turn controls our lives for us. We all have fears connected with our marriages. We all have fears connected with our children. We all have fears connected with our jobs. We all have fears connected to what other people think of us. We all have fears connected to whether we're going to have enough money or not. We all have fears connected. We could sit here and just name literally hundreds of fears that we alcoholics have. Just like with resentments, we simply take them out of our head and we put them on column 1 and make a list of them. They came to me and said, make a list of your fears. And I said, well, I'm not afraid of anything. And they said, oh, well, yes, surely you're afraid of something. And I said, no, I'm not either. By God, I'm tough, I'm mean. They said, well, are you afraid of snakes? And I said, well, hell yes, anybody's afraid of snakes. They said, well, put snakes down. And I put snakes down, and that opened the door. And I began to list those fears. I was afraid of my boss. I was afraid of the police. I was afraid of my neighbor. I was afraid of this and afraid of that and afraid of that. And I began to fill out sheet after sheet after sheet, just like I did with resentments. I don't believe any of us will ever recognize and realize how many fears we really do have until we get them all down on a sheet of paper and see them for the first time in their entirety. Now, we've made a decision to let God direct our thinking. And if we have that many fears, then fears direct our thinking and God can't. It's just that simple, just like it was with resentments. Column 2. By the side of each one of those fears, I put down the cause of it. Now, like Joe said, this is not an attempt to psychoanalyze. You know, I'm not going to say that I'm afraid of the dark because Mother set me on the potty sideways when I was 2 years old. Fear is just like resentment. We're supposed to have some fear. We'll never be completely free of it. Fear used for the right purposes brings caution, keeps us from getting hurt. Yeah, I'm a little bit afraid of the dark, you betcha. Why? Well, I don't have headlights that I can see at night. And that brings caution and keeps me from getting hurt. I'm a little bit afraid of heights. Why? Well, I don't have wings and I can't fly. And that keeps me from getting hurt. But if it keeps me from riding in an airplane, or if it keeps me from riding in an elevator, or if fear of darkness keeps me from going outside after dark, then I better get them on this paper and look at it very carefully because they're controlling and ruling and dominating my life for me. Most of my fears, I find, are connected usually with about 1 of 3 different things. Usually I'm scared to death about something because I'm afraid I'm not going to get what I really do want. I'm scared to death that I'm going to lose something that I've already got. Or I'm scared to death that I've done something I shouldn't have done and what they're going to do to me whenever they catch me. And that all of my fears revolve around those things. Just simply put down the cause. For instance, if I put down I'm afraid of my boss, in column 2 the cause is, well, I'm afraid he's going to fire me. That's why I'm afraid of him, period. Afraid he's going to fire me. If I'm afraid of my wife, well, hell, it's because she's probably going to file for divorce again, you know. I'm afraid of the police. It's because I'm always breaking the law and I'm afraid what they're going to do whenever they catch me. Every fear of God has some cause behind it. Column 3. Which part of self is affected? Just like with resentments. I can't experience fear unless there's a threat to one of my basic instincts of life. If you threaten my social instinct in any way, my self-esteem, my personal relationships, it creates fear. If you threaten my security, it creates fear. If you threaten my sex life, it creates fear. And just like with resentments, I begin to see a certain pattern begin to develop. Probably it's going to be a combination of all three basic instincts, but at least one of them is really going to stand out. Maybe one person, our greatest fear is what other people think of us, self-esteem. Maybe another person, our greatest fear deals with material security, scared to death we're not going to have enough money. Maybe another person, it is involved in our sex lives. At least one part of self is really going to stand out and show us what part of self we're having trouble with. And we begin to see certain patterns develop because of those fears. Column 4. What did I do? What did I do, if anything, to set the ball rolling? And set in motion trains of circumstances which have led to my being in a position to have the fear. Just like with resentments. Almost invariably I find I've made a decision based upon self, which created problems for other people and in turn caused me then to have to experience the fear of what's going to happen and what they're going to do whenever they catch me. Most of my fears, I myself have set that ball rolling in one way or the other. Column 5. Where had I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, or inconsiderate? Which of the above character defects caused me to do what I did or caused me to hold on to the old fear even though I may have done nothing to cause it? And just like with resentments, I begin to see in that 5th column the kind of personality that I've developed through my years of living a life run on self-will. I've become a very selfish human being. Scared to death I'm not going to get what I want. Scared to death I'm going to lose what I've already got. I become a very dishonest human being. When you're running on fear all the time, you've got to become a liar. You've got to become a cheat and a conner and a manipulator if you're running on fear all the time. I've become a very self-seeking, frightened individual, thinking only about what I want or about what I need and never concerned with other people. I've become a very inconsiderate human being, always concerned with what I need and what I want and to hell with the rest of them. And I begin to see in the 5th column that if I don't change that kind of character, that if I stay selfish, if I stay dishonest, if I stay self-seeking and frightened, if I stay inconsiderate, I'm going to keep right on doing the same things I've always done, keep right on experiencing the same old fears I've always felt, and they're going to block me off from God, and sooner or later, the mind is going to start seeking release, and it'll begin to think about the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a couple of drinks. And next thing you know, we become insane and we're drunk all over again. Fear rules us, drives us, dominates us, controls our life for us. Now, we made a decision to let God direct our thinking. And if we got that many fears, then God can't direct our thinking because the fears are directing our thinking. And my little store, which has got this file cabinet that's filled with all those fears, God is very effectively blocked out of there. And we're going to have to do something about their removal, just like we did with the removal of resentments, before God's thinking and begin to enter my mind. A very simple process. Now, if you think resentments look dumb on paper, wait till you get your fears on paper. Oh, they look good in your head. They really do. But you get these fears down on paper and fill this sheet out and see the truth behind them. they look double, double, double dumb. And we don't like to look dumb. And we're going to find that the majority of these fears are going to disappear, simply because they look so stupid when we see the truth behind them, just like the majority of the resentments disappeared. But again, there's probably going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 fears embedded in our minds so deeply that we're probably going to have a little help there in order to remove some of those fears too. We now come to the second prayer in the big book in step 4. This one is dealing with fears. Joe?
He said, perhaps there's a better way. We think so, for we're now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. See, we made a decision earlier to let God direct our life rather than letting fear and resentment direct our life. We're going to let God direct our life. We trust infinite God rather than our finite self. We're in the world to play the role He assigns, just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us, and humbly rely on Him does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. More promises. See, now, we never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think that spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it's the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. Here's the prayer. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. And at once, we commence to outgrow fear. And my second sponsor, Franklin Williams, he's dead now, bless his heart. He said, Joe, the 2 most important things about prayer, absolutely the 2 most important things about prayer, and he said, don't you ever forget it. One is to start, and the other one is to continue. And as I look back, I can see that every time I have prayed, I have changed just a little bitty fuzz, hardly noticeable to me or anybody else. And the next time I pray, I change just a little bitty fuzz, hardly noticeable to me or anybody else. And as the time has gone by, I have a major change in me. I am not what I used to be, thank God. Not because of something that I did. I can't heal a sick mind with a sick mind. I ask God to direct my attention and ask Him what I can do. And He has helped me do that and took away these fears that I have. I don't have those fears like I used to. Prior to AA, I was what they call proactive. If I perceived a threat from you, it was not good for you, I'd jump on you first thing. I'd do that. Over there where Charlie and I came from, we came from the same part of town. They had 2 kinds of people over there. One that ran people home from school, and those others who ran home from school. And if they ever got you to run any, they wouldn't let up on you. So I became one of those people who ran people home from school, scared to death that they were going to get me to running. You see, that's the reason I did that. Of course, I don't know that. But God has changed that for me. I don't have those kind of feelings anymore, thank God.
We're always about the promises on page 83 and 84. We never hear much about the promises spread throughout the entire book. Joe just read one of the greatest promises in the book. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. At once, we commence to outgrow that fear. We do just exactly like we did with resentments. In resentments, we prayed for those we resented. And the lady in the back of the book suggested we do that every day for 2 weeks. Same way with these fears. If we experience that fear, if it's keeping us from doing something we want to do, if it's causing us from doing things we shouldn't be doing, we want to get rid of it, we ask God to remove it and direct our attention to what He would have us be instead. At once we commence to outgrow that fear. The next time it pops up, we ask again. And through repeated prayer, the fear will be removed. Now, once again, God's not going to leave another hole in my head. I got enough of those already. If those fears disappear, they're going to have to be replaced with something else. And the only thing that can replace them will be the opposite. Where my mind used to be filled with fear, now it's filled with faith and courage. And I find I can do a lot of things that I was always afraid to do. Just as importantly, I find that I can quit doing some of those things I was afraid I had to keep on doing them. Now, if you have had all these fears removed, 95% because they look so stupid, 5% through prayer, then that means our mind is now free from fear, and that part of it is filled with faith and courage. And another very positive happening. We're in much less danger now of getting drunk than we were when we started the inventory process. And just like with resentments, we're doing step 4. This is the fears part. Out in that 5th column, we now see the exact nature of the wrong we're going to talk about in 5. The fear is the wrong. That's what blocks me from God. But the nature of it's what within me that causes that. We now see in the 5th column the character defects we be willing to turn loose of in step 6. We see in the 5th column the shortcomings that we're going to ask God to take away in step 7. Hopefully then that we can begin to change. Quite naturally, some of the names in column 1 are going to be people and institutions I've harmed, and I'm scared to death what they're going to do whenever they catch me. So they'll come off of column 1 and be added to the sheet to be used later on for steps 8 and 9. When we get to step 8 and 9, the book says we've got the list, we made it, and we took step 4. The resentment, some of those came off for 8 and 9. Now some come off the fears list for 8 and 9. And you know what really amazed me is I began to see several of the same names appearing on both sheets. I resented Barbara, and by golly, I feared Barbara too. I'm still a little bit afraid of her today. She may do it again if she finds out everything I was doing 30-some-odd years ago. I resented the Internal Revenue Service, and I feared the Internal Revenue Service too. I never had tied that together in my mind before. How closely these resentments and these fears seem to run together over and over and over and over and over again. Now, if you've got a fear in your mind, knowing that if you don't get rid of it, you might get drunk over it, and you don't find that you don't want to get rid of it, then we better look at it very, very closely, because we're probably using it to rationalize and justify, just like we use some resentments for that too. Let me give you a good for instance. I want to ask you a question, and please be honest with me. How many of you in here this morning would like to go back to school and finish your education? Could I see your hands? Man, there's a whole bunch of us. I'm going to ask you another question. Now, please be honest. How many of you really intend to do that? Could I see your hands? About a third of the hands went up this time. Why? Nothing in the world but fear. Fear of hard work. Fear of failure. Fear that we won't measure up. Fear of the unknown. Keeps us from really doing something we really would like to do and probably should do. Just as importantly, fear can keep us doing things that we really shouldn't be doing, but we have fear connected with them if we don't do those kind of things. It can control us and rule us and dominate our lives for us. You know, I've always loved to work with my hands, always have all my life. I always wanted to build a set of kitchen cabinets, but I never would do that because I knew they wouldn't look very good, there would be a lot of mistakes in them, and people would laugh at them. And fear kept me from doing that. After having worked this program for a number of years, one day I decided to build a set of kitchen cabinets. Now, they don't look very good, and there's a lot of mistakes in them, and people laugh at them, but I don't much give a damn anymore. Fear no longer keeps me from doing something that I really do want to do. You know, it's amazing how fear controls and rules and dominates our thinking. And if it controls and rules and dominates our thinking, it's controlling our life for us. And we've made a decision to let God do that. And if fear does it, then God can't do that. It's just about that simple.
About 25, 30 years ago, I knew this young man. He was a Vietnamese, came over here on the boat and couldn't speak a word of English, and he was become a dentist while he was here. And I kind of was talking to him. I said, "You guys are pretty smart." He said, "Well, people think we are." He said, "But the point is," he said, "that this is America. I took advantage of what America has to offer. All we have to do is go to that school and ask them what we have to do. And they'll tell you. And then do that, and you can become whatever you want to become. Whatever it is. Whatever you can imagine. It can happen. If you willing. So, that's simple."
Okay, now we did something about our resentments. They were removed and replaced with love, patience, tolerance, compassion, and goodwill. We've done something about our fears. They've been removed and replaced with faith and courage. But back here in the back of my store, there's a storeroom, remember, that's filled with shame and guilt and remorse associated with the things I've done in the past that have hurt other people and hurt institutions. And if I want God to direct all my thinking, then I'm going to have to do something about emptying out that storeroom back there so that He can direct that part of my thinking also. Now, in order for me to do something about that shame and guilt and remorse and etc., again, I'm going to have to get it down on paper and look at it so I can see the truth behind it. And it seems as though we human beings hurt other people faster and easier in the sexual area than we do in any other way. And I think there's some reasoning behind that too. You know, the other animals here on earth, when it comes time, they don't have this thing called self-will. Everything they do it in God's time and at God's direction. When it becomes time for them to reproduce themselves, God usually signifies that with some physical change in the female of the species. The male senses that change, prepares himself, the two join together, and it's kind of like bang, bang, thank you, ma'am. And when it's over with, they normally go their separate ways. Not always, but usually. Now, they didn't think about having sex before they had it. They couldn't decide when they were going to have sex. They usually can't decide who they're going to have sex with. They normally can't decide whether they're going to have sex with one or more partners. And they can't even decide what position they're going to do sex in. Therefore, you see very few sexual problems amongst the other animals here on earth. I've never seen a cow on a psychiatrist's couch yet talking about sexual dysfunction. They just don't have those kind of problems. Their emotions are not involved in it. We human beings are a little bit different. You know, God not only gives us the sex urge so that we can reproduce ourselves, but He gives us this thing called self-will. And He allows us to make decisions about our sex lives. You know, we can have sex any day of the year we wish to. We can decide who we're going to have sex with. We can decide how many times we're going to do it, providing we're physically capable of doing so. We can decide whether we're going to do it with one or more sexual partners. We could even decide what position we're going to do it in. They tell me there's something like 64 different positions a human being can have sex in. I have no idea what they are. I only found 3 in my lifetime. And 2 of those damn near killed me. I'm not sure I'm going back to it. So what we're going to do for just a few minutes this morning is we're going to look a little bit, not so much as to how we do sex, but as to how we think about sex. Because how we think about it determines how we're going to do it. And that in turn determines whether it's going to end up hurting other people or not. And then that determines whether we're going to have to suffer the pain of retaliation and the guilt and the remorse and the fear associated with what they're going to do when they find out. So we're going to look basically in our minds rather than dealing with our bodies. The book says now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there. Now, you older fellas, don't get your hopes up. We're talking mental, not physical. But above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off the track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. I've heard them all my life. They're the ones that say sex is a dirty thing, that you ought to do it at one time in one position with one person only, and the only reason to do it is to reproduce yourself, and if you enjoy it, it's a sinful thing. I've heard them as far back as I can remember. They are to the extremes on one side. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. And you hear them today. They're the ones that say you ought to be able to have sex anytime you want to, with anybody you want to, as many times as you want to, in any position you want to, and you ought to be able to enjoy it every time, and if you don't, there must be something wrong with you. Maybe they call that the sexual revolution. Main thing I see wrong with it, it happened 25 years too late for me to participate in it. I know that. One school would allow Ben no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? And I read that last statement with great relief, because I knew this book was getting ready to condemn me for what I had been in the past. I knew it was getting ready to tell me what I was going to have to do in the future. And I'd already made up my mind I wasn't going to pay any attention to it whatsoever. And I'm real glad to find out we're not going to try to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. You know, this book is meant to be helpful to anybody, anywhere, anytime. And if we start trying to tell people how they're going to have to conduct their sex lives, then surely we're going to alienate people. Besides that, what is sexually acceptable in one part of the world may not be acceptable at all in another part of the world. So we simply are not going to get into that particular picture at all. What we are going to do is see a little set of instructions that's going to show us how to look at our own past sex life, see what we've been doing with it, and above all, see why we've been doing those things, and see if maybe we've been hurting some other people, and then if maybe we can't shape a new sex life in the future where we can still engage in it, yet enjoy it, and at the same time not harm other human beings. And basically that's what this whole thing about sex is about here in the big book. Joe?
Again, we're going to say that we're going to do what the book says. We're going to find the facts. We're going to face the facts, engage in the process to accept the facts. We're looking for ideas, emotions, and attitudes about sex and where they came from and how they affected us. There's a couple of places in the book that talks about back of them is a world of misunderstanding and ignorance. Back on page 570 it talks about the only thing to keep a man in everlasting ignorance is contempt prior to investigation. A lot of people today would have us to believe that we were into denial. I've never been into denial, but I have been into ignorance most of my life. See, I softened that. I just didn't know. I wasn't fully uninformed. And I look back into my life about sex. My dad had got out of the nut house and went to California. My mother had these 5 kids that were getting bigger, not growing up, but getting bigger. And one time I went to her, and I've been thinking about sex a lot. And I almost had brain damage from it. And I said, Mom, I've been thinking about sex. And she said, oh, my God, it scared the heck out of her. Benny Joe, that's not a good thing to be thinking about. It's a dirty, filthy, rotten thing to be thinking about, and you ought to save it for the one you love. Well, that's what she said.
That sound familiar to anybody?
Yeah. And the only reason you want to have sex is to have children. Well, she had 5 children. I figured that out real quick. And I thought, well, no wonder my dad was in the nut house. So I didn't quite believe that. We had sex.